Welcome, everybody. I'm Elaine Clark, lead facilitator with Blue Matter Project. Joining us today is Jay Andrews, a musician, a producer, a trauma-conscious yoga teacher based in Toronto. After 20 years as a touring musician, Jay found yoga and meditation through his recovery from addiction. Jay blends the worlds of rhythm and sound with breath and movement and has created a unique style of yoga called Nidra, which combines deep relaxation with sound vibration. Jay is joining us today to talk about his personal experience of recovery and the 12 steps, and how yoga and sound therapy has been a powerful adjunct to his healing journey. Jay Andrews, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So you and I both share a tremendous love for sound therapy and yoga. Can you tell us about a defining moment or maybe a certain time in your life where these two worlds kind of merge together?
Ooh, I don't know. I've been playing drums for like 27 years. When they started coming together with yoga, that was when I found the practice of Nada yoga, discovered that existed at all. And then started reading about that, practicing that kind of style of meditation. And really changing my perception on what drumming and sound actually meant, as far as what is it at its root before, for me, the music business or competing or something else kind of comes in to factor into rhythm and sound itself. What is its root? And I didn't realize how vast that was until I started looking into Nada yoga. So I guess kind of when I found that practice, that I guess let's say lineage of yoga, was a very defining moment for me, because it also helped me readjust my relationship with music, which had become much like my addiction to substance, quite harming for myself in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I want to kind of circle back to that. I think a lot of people often immediately associate the 12 steps to alcohol, but really it's for anyone who's been affected by their own addictive behavior, whether that's substance or food or codependency, but also for those affected by the addictive behaviors of other people.
Mm.
Can you speak to us a little bit about your experience with the 12 steps, and maybe bring to awareness what it's like for people who don't have any idea of what the 12 steps is, or what it looks like?
Right. So the 12 steps is it's kind of the step-by-step working process that you go through within a lot of recovery programs. So AA and alcoholism are kind of seen as a main staple, because AA itself was one of the first kind of recovery programs, let's say. But those 12 steps go right across the board as far as addiction goes. So narcotics, any kind of cocaine, all the way. I have friends who fentanyl, recovering addicts, sex addiction, food addiction. They usually just take the 12 steps and they'll just change the wording a little bit. So the 12 steps are really used kind of across the board by a lot of different, and it's not always substance either. The process of the 12 steps, there's an aspect of it which relates to this idea of a higher power or something bigger than the self. There's an aspect to it which relates to ideas around a lot of the same things we talk about in yoga, like attachment or powerlessness or impermanence and things like that. And it's all kind of done sequentially. And then there's a few steps which are actually action steps, which you actually, all the steps you do, but these ones you actually sit down and write things, or you go and talk to a sponsor or a spiritual advisor, or you go and make amends. And then some of the other steps are kind of like sustaining steps, as in things you do every day throughout your life to help maintain sobriety, and help keep you on this path, so that the path can be of thousands of different paths, you know, as many as there are different faiths and gods and whatever. There's many different paths, but the 12 steps is kind of the main road, and then you kind of figure out which way you want to go from there.
Mhm. So talk to us a little bit about, I'd love to hear in as much detail as you feel comfortable. Tell us a little bit about your journey of recovery and sobriety.
Okay. So I got sober first when I was 28. Before that, I was a musician, professional musician. I still am, play professionally, but it was full time for me. And I had done that since I was 10. So that's really all I've kind of ever done and ever known. Yeah, and then by the time I got to 28, essentially, like, I was done. I couldn't sustain the way that I was living anymore. And that happened in many factors. So music, my relationship with music had become quite toxic because I was also addicted to money and work. And work is music, but when you take the thing that kind of feeds you and then it turns into something else, and then you get addicted to the other aspect of that, it becomes really kind of sneaky, like you don't really see it. So my music career was kind of going, but what was really, really falling off by the time I was 28 was my mental stability. In that I had dealt with depression since I was like probably a young teenager, but I never really looked at it. Started drinking when I was, let's say 16, I probably was when I started drinking, and it started out as fun. I used to have like good parties in high school. However, there were things from my childhood when I was young that I did not look at. And it wasn't like I was consciously pushing things away. Like acute traumas that had happened, which I honestly didn't even really come into my mind that much. Like I never thought about them. Every once in a while I would, but then I'd just go blackout drunk and then whatever, it would be gone. Which is really interesting about like acute trauma events, especially in childhood, how they kind of hide in the subconscious brain. And I've met a lot of people in recovery who have experienced this as well. So then I started, drinking 16, and it was partying for a while. And then my dad died when I was 22, and our relationship was really odd. It was already pretty broken by that time anyways. And he passed away, and then I just took the same pattern and just never dealt with anything. And then my drinking for like 8 years went like skyrocketed. The issue with my well, there was many issues, but the thing that kind of held me back from looking at the issues was I could always work and drink at the same time. Actually, I oftentimes wouldn't go to work unless they were providing me bottles, like while I was DJing or while I was playing. So I was drunk all the time. If I was at work, I was drunk. And if I was not at work, I might have been sober for a few days, and then I could go, I don't know, whatever would happen. So by the time I was 28, the drinking had escalated, but the level of control I had of my mental stability was like, it was zero. Super erratic, up and down, and really bad depressive drops, like deep, like days I could sit in bed shaking, and it was a whole thing. So I ended up going to recovery when I was 28. I went for 3 months. I didn't do anything. I just kind of sat there and listened. And then I relapsed once, and then I that was kind of my step one. In step one, they talk about powerlessness. Powerlessness over the substance. So for me, the substance is alcohol. I never really got into drugs because I was a blackout person. I was trying to black out. It was my goal. And drugs would kind of pull you out of blackout a lot of times. So that wasn't very effective for me. And they're super expensive as well. But yeah, so sorry, that step one is kind of the powerlessness, which came from that relapse. The powerlessness. And then they say that there's an unmanageability of your life. So for me, the unmanageability was laying in my mind, for sure. I just had no control at that point. So powerlessness wasn't an issue. And then step 2 and 3, they start to look at a higher power. And essentially the idea, if you read Russell Brand's book, for instance, he like renamed the 12 steps. I haven't read it, but I heard him talking. Essentially the first step is you're effed. And the second step is, are you going to un-F yourself? So the idea of the higher power is to help you kind of realign your life, realign the way that you live, the way that you act, the way that you think, the way that you look at the world. So yeah, those steps are the first 3, and then it moved into action steps as far as recovery goes. So I stopped working for 3 months, and then I got a sponsor and started working on these steps. And yeah, I kind of just made my way through them slowly. I got a doctor at 9 months, an addictions trauma therapist, because I wasn't drinking, but my mental health had crashed yet again. So I got a therapist. I worked with him for like a year, about a year and a half ish. And then within this time, part of the 12 steps, step 11 talks about prayer and meditation. And my sponsor's really big on, I don't care what you do, but do something. So I was never a big prayer at that time. So I kind of took to meditation and just started sitting and reading about meditation. And about 2 or 3 months into that, I would find that I was getting experiences like watching my mind, or like watching traumas play out in my mind as if I was like seeing them on a screen, kind of. From a distance, which is one of the reasons I love yoga nidra, because that's essentially what that practice is looking to get you to, is to be able to kind of observe the self from a place of awareness. So once I had that experience, I was like sold on meditation, but I was never much of a mover. And then I started yoga, I don't know, probably 8 months after I started meditating. Yeah, and the rest just kind of kept going. I just met some teachers. I took some programs that they had mentioned might be useful for me to do. And it's just kind of kept going. But the 2 systems feed each other. Like yoga, if you look at actually most spiritual systems, and the 12 steps are pretty much really well aligned. I mean, even in step 5, you're essentially, you're going and talking to your sponsor and telling them essentially your whole life and all of your resentments that you've ever held, which is the same as like a confession, let's say, and from the church. Or yeah, a lot of the steps are aligned with a lot of different spiritual practices. So once I figured out that they're kind of feeding into each other, it's just kind of kept going from there. And then I started teaching like a year ago. And yeah, now we're here. So now I've been through the step process itself, which sometimes can take a long time. Sometimes it doesn't have to really take that long. For a lot of people in recovery, if they're really struggling, sponsors will move them through the step process as quickly as possible, because they're trying to clean up, essentially clean up your past as best you can. Because the reason that we use substance for a lot of us is because something happened in the past, or we're holding on to things that we just can't let go of.
I love that. Can we actually elaborate on that? I would love to touch on the idea of pain, because I think a lot of the time, I think in our society, pain is often seen as something like there's something wrong with us. And we're not really taught how to process pain. And so I actually want to share, just recently I was talking with my nephew, and he said to me, he was like, he said, did you know that buffaloes, when they see a storm, they run straight towards the storm? And I was like, oh, I had no idea. That's the first time I'm hearing that. And then I started thinking about how, for me, yoga, that's sort of my way of running right into the pain. It offers me a space where I can really feel that pain, that loss, that grief, rather than turning away from it and turning to substance. Can you talk a little bit about pain and maybe even shame on that note?
Well, pain is interesting. I mean, I can only really talk from my own experience because that's all I have. But what I'll say is like the pain that I had experienced for the most part was like a subconscious under the blanket pain that I never really had to look at because could drink, you know? It's like substance is killing me and it's ruining my life, but at the same time it's keeping me alive. So it's one of the reasons that substances are really hard to quit because it's like your best friend. It's like the thing that keeps you going is now gone and you're just kind of like now floating in the middle of the ocean with nothing to help, like the seasickness, which is a very like scary place to be. um, for me, one of the big teachings that yoga has brought to my life and Buddhism essentially is that the pain is only part of you. It's not your whole of what you are as a being, um, which was like a super important teaching because for me, the issue with pain is that I think that like I am that. So if we talk about depression, um, a lot of it comes down to like shame or like self-esteem, right? It's like something bad happens that's my fault. And now my mind turns on itself essentially and just starts digging the hole. So for me, it's like to be able to sit down and watch the process happen with the teaching, with the knowledge from the teachings that I am not just that. Like I can watch it happen without having it crush me, without me having to go to the liquor store or go to the bar, was like a monumental, like I get emotional thinking about it because it's like the reason that I'm alive. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it seems like a small teaching, but it's like, it's so catastrophically huge for like people in recovery, you know? That's why some of the steps are really influential. It's because you do them and then you feel weight lifted off your shoulder that you didn't even realize was there, you know? It's like until I did step 4, I never looked at like the biggest trauma that I've had from when I was 7 years old. Like I never looked at that situation. I never looked at the person that was involved. I never looked at any of it, because it's like I didn't even know it was there until I wrote it down on that piece of paper, like at the age of 28. And I've met people who are 60 who are just like cluing into like, oh yeah, that thing happened when I was 14, you know, and they've been doing cocaine for like 40 years or something. So that the mind and the problem of addiction is very sneaky. And I think pain is like the same way. And the kind of double-edged sword is like you have to process it for it to move through. Like if I keep pushing it away and I keep putting it into a bottle, then it's like it doesn't go anywhere, you know? It's like I've heard this doctor that I study with sometimes say that like a good therapy session is essentially developing trust with the therapist so that you can relive the traumas so that you can then process them so that they move through the system. You know, I read a lot about like energy work and like shaking, like the Kalahari Bushmen in Africa, or a lot of drumming practices are done, and like those shaking practices of essentially letting life energy move through you to work those energies through because they have to be processed. Shame is for me a different thing because it's like directly linked to self-esteem. So that's a challenging one for me because self-esteem was by far my biggest issue. It's like inside there's a hole, but outside I have to be a musician, I have to go to work, so I have to like build this huge ego, you know? And then it's like, but inside I know that there's nothing, well, I think that there's nothing in there. So there's a dichotomy of like a soullessness or like a worthlessness with a huge ego on the outside. So to break that stuff down, you've got to dissolve the ego first. Step 1, like I said in the 12 steps, is all about powerlessness. A big part of that is a big problem, sorry, I should say, with getting that step is trying to push through the ego to say that I'm powerless over something. Because that's shameful in itself, especially in our society. Like if you're a man, for instance, to acknowledge that you're powerless, or if you're anybody really, to acknowledge that you don't have power over a situation is really kind of interesting. The reason I say if you're a man, because like in my world, it's about sex abuse. So like sex abuse for males, especially in their 20s, is like, I rarely hear people talk about that, which is one of the reasons I speak out about it quite a bit, is because I think it's important to talk about that stuff. But there's like a level of shame, right? Of powerlessness, of like, I don't have control over this, which is so odd because really we don't have control over anything. That's what this COVID-19 thing is showing everybody right now. But in Western society, it's like control. It's like, I need to have control of what's going on. Yeah, so I mean, that was a lot of thoughts in one thing. I don't know if any of that made sense, but shame is, shame's a big one for me because it's directly linked with self-esteem. And when I talk about things like sex abuse or the loss of parents or death, and then not looking at those things, it's like I've been sober now for 3 years and a couple months, and I'm still like, I still don't know really the complete effects of that. I remember sitting in my doctor's office once, and we were talking through that trauma from a childhood, and he said, Jay, you don't understand the amount of things that does to your mind. You know, like in AA, they say like 5 years, like stay sober for 5 years and things might like start to like kind of level out. And my doctor told me not to sponsor anybody for at least 5 years because of the amount of things that play out in that. Those, like, they could be quick events that plant thousands of seeds, like karmas and samskaras, for a long time. So I'm still like working through the shames, let's say, you know, but it's the practices of yoga and meditation that allow me to work through them. Yoga, meditation, and the 12 steps, and then I can keep going without them like eating me away, kind of.
Yes, absolutely. On that note, can you share with us some of the most powerful practices that are supportive for addictive behavior? So what's working for you? What would you say really, like when you're getting that sense of craving or temptation, what is it that you turn to? What practice works for you? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Physical cravings. I haven't had physical cravings in a while, but cravings and depression just go hand in hand pretty much. So I'm not looking out for cravings. I'm not waiting for cravings. What I'm more on guard for every day is like depressive drops, because what comes with depression is a craving. Because that's why I drink, you know? So the practices, I'll start with like, I'd sit every morning just to kind of get my bearing on what's going on in my mind or whatever. But the practice of meditation only begins there, really. It's like I have to practice all day because I don't have a choice. You see, if I do an action, let's say, like lie to somebody about something significant, I know now, I didn't know this before, but I know now that that's going to live in my body for the rest of the day and in my mind. Even though I'm not thinking about it, it's going to be there. So I could wake up the next day and feel depressed for no reason, you know? So I have to be very conscious of what I'm doing all day. So the practice doesn't really end. It's like you don't practice the AA, or you don't practice the AA program, you live the program. It becomes your life. So when I'm sitting in the mornings right now, when I first was in recovery, I was doing like Zazen, silent meditation, watch the breath. I did that for like quite a long time, probably a year, maybe 8 months to a year, which was super effective because that teaches me about seeing my thoughts and just watching things happen and being able to sit there and see things play out. Which, a side note, Yoga Nidra later down, which I started like probably a year and a half ago, was like that turned up, because your mind is much more relaxed and you're able to really watch things play out without them affecting you. But that's another note. So I did that for a long time. And then I spent a bunch of months practicing forgiveness meditations, which I still do, which are really good, which kind of go hand in hand with like metta meditations. So like loving kindness. I did do Tonglen meditation for a while, and I still do it sometimes, but Tonglen meditation it's a really advanced practice, and like it doesn't always feel good, like great. It's sometimes like not what I need in the way. I should say that like as far as addiction goes and like the addictive mindset and what I know is going to take me down eventually if I feed those thoughts, it's like that's ever changing. So one of the reasons I study a lot of different practices is because I have a lot of different tools. So sometimes I do like shaking, you know, like I'll play my djembe and chant. I do a lot of chanting stuff too. And I'll just like do intuitive movement to get stuff like moving through me. So sometimes like that's what I need. So my meditation is not always like a still sitting meditation. Yeah, it really varies day by day. But what I will say is I sit every day, at least once. And I do some kind of movement every day, whether it's like yoga asana or even restorative yoga. Yeah, sometimes I do Tai Chi, but it's kind of rare. I wish I did more. Yeah, and what I've learned since this COVID thing is like I need to be creating. I have to be creating, because if I'm not learning and pushing my boundaries of like what I think I can do, I get really stagnant, and I get like this is where depression starts. So it's a big practice for me, a day-to-day practice of monitoring constantly, which I will say for the first year and a half was really, really tiring. Like physically, it's very exhausting to constantly be aware of your mind. Like you get really annoyed, sort of. At least I did, where it's just like I'm constantly waiting for the next crash. And the first 2 years of recovery were that. It's just like I know another one is coming. I just don't know when it's coming. And it's like a depressive crash for me is like there's essentially like a line for me, and it's I can deal with a certain amount of darkness, but once a certain line hits, I know that I'm losing control. So I start to really crash down, and then I would have to like get into bed. I'd put a bunch of clothes on because I would get really cold, and then I would get into bed and I'd usually shake. I could be in bed for like, I don't know, at that time, anywhere from 4 hours to like 3 days, maybe. So it just like, it really depended. But that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a crash. I haven't had one of those in quite a while though. And I really kind of believe that coldness and that shaking is those things moving through you. So I guess there's no linear answer to that question, because it just depends on the day. Some days I feel really good. Some days I wake up and I feel like pretty bad, you know, but I have the practices and I can usually turn it around pretty quickly. And usually when I feel bad, it's coming from the mind. So I do practices then like shaking, drumming, and chanting, because it just gets me right past the mind. Like if I do that for half an hour, the mind will kind of move away.
Absolutely. For myself, experiencing in your class on my mat the benefits of sound therapy, I want to get into the topic of rhythmic entrainment. Because for me, I think I had probably one of the most profound experiences of that in your class. And I was really grateful for that experience. And I love how you join, you really sort of merge the language with sound and also movement to create a really sort of powerful experience. Can you describe to us what rhythmic entrainment is for people who don't know anything about it, and maybe talk a little bit about the brainwaves, and also you can even introduce some of the instruments that you use to create that experience?
Oh yeah, sure. So the idea of entrainment is essentially that there's a law in the universe, scientifically and philosophically, that things within a particular amount of space between each other want to move together because it's the most energetically efficient way to move. So the person who like discovered this entrainment thing was the person who invented grandfather clocks and made them. And he had a huge room of them, and he would like hit them to make sure they worked. And if he left and came back 8 hours later, he noticed that they were all swinging together. So they're in training with one another. The idea of rhythmic entrainment is more of a forced entrainment. And it works on the idea of brainwaves. So the way our brains operate, even our thought patterns, and our physical bodies as well, is all essentially waves of energy, as science has told us, moving of protons and electrons and all these things from a scientific point of view. So when we play certain rhythms at very precise tempos, the brain waves will begin to entrain with the rhythm that's being played. This has been used in shamanism for like thousands of years. And if you looked at shamanism from around the world, most of the rhythms that they're using, like at a base level, are played at 240 beats per minute. So if you break 240 beats per minute to 60 seconds per minute, you get 4 beats per minute, which is the low end of theta brainwave state. And there's 4 main brainwave states. The one we're in right now is beta, approximately like 13 to 9 cycles per second, meaning waves per second. Beta alpha is then you're going, I'm trying to think of the numbers here, 9 to 5. No, that's wrong. I got the first one wrong. Theta, so it goes beta is the waking state, a more calm state, which is like a light meditation. You're starting to like kind of rest into a sleepy state, is an alpha state. Below that is a theta state. And theta state is 4 to 8 cycles per second. And in this state is where like deep meditation lives. So when they've tested very experienced meditators, like lifelong monks and things, you'll find them usually sitting in this theta range. Below that is delta, which is deep sleep. And there are a few meditators who can be awake and mindful and have their minds in a delta state, but it's really rare that that happens. So if I'm playing a beat at 240 beats per minute, that equates down to 4 beats per second. So if I do that, let's say for 8 to 15 minutes, most of the population's brain will end up in training to that rhythm. It's very precise, though. You have to play it really kind of tight. So most of the shamanic rhythms sit at 240 beats per minute, and they have for a long time. Also, if you were to test the vibrational frequency of the planet itself, the Earth, it sits around 7. And 7 beats per second also lives in a lot of different like natural frequency ranges. Sorry, not frequency ranges, but like natural phenomena. So there's something about this theta range. This is also the range that you're trying to get into with Yoga Nidra, because it's when the active mind begins to fall back and the subconscious mind begins to come forward. The difference is in Yoga Nidra, we're keeping you aware so that you can watch the process kind of happen. As far as like entrainment with other instruments goes, or other human beings, essentially we all have our tone, our unique tone as a human being. And we entrain or sympathetically resonate with other tones. So that's why we like some people and don't like other people, is because there's people who are on our frequency, from a philosophical point of view, but from a scientific point of view as well. And then there's people who are just on a kind of different frequency. So there's dissonance between people. So sometimes we entrain really well with somebody, and sometimes we don't entrain that well with somebody. So it can be done with.
I love that you just said that, because I feel like I feel like we think that we're just a bunch of personalities interacting with each other, but I really think that we're just a bunch of nervous systems interacting with each other.
Yeah, we're like a bunch of waves just like moving into each other. And then sometimes the waves like go together and sometimes they just knock into each other, and it doesn't really work that way. Yeah, so that's kind of the basis of entrainment. So it's really effective to do with drumming, especially low frequencies, like low frequency drumming. So like bass tones work quite well. But you can also resonate and entrain with frequencies, which is like what binaural beats do a lot of times. And then there's like many theories, and there's science behind not being in rhythm or in harmony with ourselves. And you can actually affiliate that with certain frequencies. So if you were to go to like a sound therapy, like doctor, like an office where they actually put headphones on you and play certain frequencies through the headphones, they're playing the frequencies that you resonate with so that you can bring the system back into harmony. In some African tribes, what they would do if somebody had a mental illness or something is that person would go and live with the drummer. And they would do a lot of healing sessions on essentially laying this person down and just playing rhythms for like 4 hours, sometimes 2 or 3 drummers just walking around this person, loud drumming, like djembe drumming, like full djembe drums, you know? And the idea is that they're re-entraining this person's system. They're bringing them back into rhythm. If you were to look at like disease or dis-ease from this point of view, essentially having a dis-ease is being out of rhythm. It's falling out of rhythm with your tone, with your frequency. And that's why people find certain environments are not very good for them, being around certain crowds of people. It's important stuff because it's like it talks about the power of our voice and the power of what we say and the power of what we put out into the world. It really has a much larger effect on us than I think we often look at. So if you were to look at it from an addiction point of view, essentially the substance is keeping us out of rhythm. So first the substance has to go, but that doesn't essentially put us back into rhythm. This is what the step system is for. The step system is for re-entraining you back into your own tone because you have lost that and it's hard to find on your own. This is why we have yoga practices in the first place. You know, none of this stuff would exist if we were all just in rhythm all the time. So that's kind of how I think about the steps, is like it's a way to bring you back into rhythm. That's aligning with a higher power is kind of the same way. It's like, I don't know how to run my life. Obviously, I wouldn't be in AA or drunk all the time if I knew what I was doing. So that higher power is like the first entrance into that kind of path into reorienting myself into my own rhythm. It's why you hear, if you hear of addicts getting recovered and then doing like phenomenal things, it's because oftentimes, I mean, people who have addictions in general are usually really stubborn, hardworking people. That's one of the reasons we don't let go of the addiction in the first place. But secondly, the step system and the way that that whole program operates is it's putting you back in line with yourself. So once you've found that and you're sober, you have way more money, you have way more time, and you really know what you want to do, it's just like you're just gone then. You know what I mean? So it's like the whole, that's how all these systems kind of work together, because as we know from yoga also, it's just one system in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a little taste of meditation? If you can introduce sound, if you like, can you just give us a little bit of a taste of what you would do maybe in a class? That can be a 5-minute meditation if you like, or even just, you know, if you want to introduce some instruments, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what instruments are going to sound like, but we can use like whatever environment the listener is in. So I'll lead you through, we'll do a quick body scan and then we'll do a listening exercise And we'll bring somatics into that exercise. So somatics meaning like physical body in really kind of feeling. So I'll help you kind of into that space. Find a comfortable seat, whatever works for you, wherever you are. Preferably the hips are below the knees and the spine is upright. You can close the eyes if that's comfortable. If you'd like to keep the eyes open, by all means, just place them 3 or 4 feet ahead of you on the floor and pick a point to hold your gaze. And let's begin a quick meditation with a few breaths in through the nose and exhales out the mouth. And allow those exhales to kind of proverbially empty the cup, to move this conversation out of the mind and release anything that's happened before this point today. Releasing any surface tension, whether that be mental, physical, emotional. And place it off to the side for just this practice. And when you're ready, allow the body to breathe itself. And just observe the body breathing itself, inhales and exhales coming in and out of the nose. And as you observe the body breathing itself, begin to tune in to all the sensations of the body. So feel the entire face and the entire head. Feel the neck, front, back, sides, shoulders. Feel any sensation down both of your arms and into your hands. And we're not judging or analyzing this sensation, but we're just witnessing what's there. Feel the torso, the upper back and the chest, the back of the ribs, the side ribs, the front ribs, the lower belly, the sides, and the lower back. Feel your entire spine. Feel your hips, your pelvis, your pelvic floor. And feel down both your legs. Notice whatever you feel. There's no right or wrong here. And notice that kind of ever-changing element of energy as it moves through you. Pulsations to different waves. These different frequencies, all these different rhythms. While they may seem different, without each and every one of them, the system as a whole would not be whole. So feel the different rhythms and wave movements of the body integrate together. And as you sit with this feeling somatically, begin to also turn your attention to your sense of hearing. And listen to anything that you hear within the environment that you're in or outside. Imagine that all these sounds were placed there specifically for you to listen to them. And as you listen, allow your hearing to jump around to each sound. When you hear a new sound pop up, let your listening go there. But at the same time, feel any changes in the physical body. Noticing how different sounds might affect you physically. Notice how the energy of you dances with the energy of the sounds around you. Notice where you feel sound, where you feel rhythm. Feel and listen to the symphony of energy that you are. Nada Yoga, we would say that everything is music or everything is vibrating. Babatunde Olatunji, the African teacher, would say that the universe revolves around rhythm. And it's when we get out of rhythm that we begin to get into trouble. Bring the palms of the hands together, give them a rub, create some heat, and then find a little bit of stillness, bowing to the rhythms, the harmonies, the vibrations of everyone and everything.
Awesome. Jay, thank you so much for being here today. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.